Hello there, this is Dara here from Nurture, and in this tutorial I'm going to walk you through how you create a task on Nurture from scratch using AI. So in this video I'm going to talk you through all of the different fields that are on here and what each of them does. And then I'll just walk through a couple of examples generating a task from scratch. Now, how you actually refine that task using AI later, I'm going to cover that in another video. But in this video, I'm basically going to talk you through this screen and what each piece does. Okay, so first things first, the description. So a lot of teachers might get a little bit confused as to what to put in here. And the simplest thing I can say is you can put anything you like in here. This will inform what the assistant outputs, right? So it could be as simple as just a topic. So you could say, I could just type World War II. And there's enough in that for it to know I need to create a task on World War II. But you can get really specific with the ask in here, okay? You can pretty much ask it to do anything you like to generate the task that you need. So this is kind of your free text field for you to ask a really specific thing for what kind of task you want, okay? Now, I'll show a more specific example of that in a moment. Your supporting material and sources, this is optional, but this is if you have a source material, let's say it's a reading comprehension, you can upload it here and we will generate the questions based on that source, okay? Next, how many questions do you want to generate? So this is by default set to 5, but if you, obviously the more questions you request, the longer it may take to generate in that first kind of generation. But this is very simply just how many questions you want to generate. The style of questions then is what style of questions you want, whether that's essay style, quizzes, or short answer questions, multiple choice questions, or true false statements, or fill in items. Okay. Now, one caveat I want to point out is it will generate questions in that style, but that doesn't mean that the student answers them any differently. They still need to either handwrite their answers, complete their answers on an attachment, or they need to type all of their answers into one main text field on their submission. There isn't like separate question boxes for students to answer on. That is something we may have in the future, but right now it's still just one text box that students need to answer, and I'll show you what that looks like in the student tutorials later. Then you have your question difficulty. So by default, this is just the expected level, but you can change this to make the questions less challenging or more challenging than the expected level. So this factors in your student reading age and any documents you have in your curriculum that you might attach when you're creating the task. Then obviously we have our reading age that's just pulled in from the classroom settings. And finally, we have our curriculum boundary, okay? So any document you select here in your curriculum boundary will be used to inform the style of questions. It'll be used to inform the marking scheme later on if we generate one. It'll be used to inform the success criteria that gets generated with the task, okay? So to put this into context, as I said, I want a task on World War II. And I actually have a source that I want it to generate questions on. This is the source. It's a reading comprehension, specifically on World War II. I'll just upload that source in here. So I wanted to generate 5 questions. I wanted an essay style question and some multiple choice questions. So what I could do in the instruction box here is I could say, give students multiple choice questions and 2 essay style, actually 2 short answer questions. Conscious that this is a reading comprehension, so I'll actually just remove the essay style question and just go with quizzes / short answer question. Okay, I'll leave it at the expected difficulty, but I could change that if I wanted to, and I'm happy with the reading age. For the curriculum boundary, I am going to just add, I have a couple of documents I know I want to add here. I'll just add this one actually out of all this list. And the final thing is the AI effort. So this is essentially how much effort you want our AI to do in terms of generating the task. So you could have it to think a little bit harder, or you could let it do it a little bit faster. Now there isn't much of a difference in the time, I feel. I do feel the quality with thinking response is generally a little bit better. But if you want it a little bit quicker, you can always change that. So I'll just click generate task, and I'll just wait for it in the background to do that generation piece. And once generated here now, we can see that we've got our 5 questions. So we've got our 3 multiple choice questions, so 1, 2, and 3, and then we have our 2 short answer questions as requested. Now, if I didn't add that extra instruction on how it should split them up, it will just do a generic split, or it might make a best educated guess. But if you want that fine tuning on anything, that's what the individual box is for. Okay. Now our source is still here, available to students. If I don't want students to be able to look at the source specifically, or you never know, you might have just uploaded a bunch of questions that you want to generate. You could remove it if you want, but obviously I'm going to leave it here if the students need to be able to read the read comprehension. And then we have our success criteria. So with all nurture assessments and tasks, success criteria have to be present. So at least 1 success criteria is there. I think by default we'll generate between 3 and 5, depending on what we feel is appropriate. And these are success criteria that are in line with Dylan Wiliam's pedagogy on best practices for success criteria, so that they're measurable and they are achievable goals for students to be able to hit. Okay. You can add more if you want. And if we want to add a marking scheme after, we can. So what this will do is I can add one here, and it gives me an empty text field. I can type in a marking scheme if I want. I can upload a marking scheme if I have one. But just to note, the marking scheme you upload should match the number of marks that you've in here, or the total maximum marks. And it should also match the questions you have in here. Otherwise, there might be conflicts with the grading later on, because the assistant might start grading questions that don't exist, or it might start missing questions that aren't kind of mentioned in the marking scheme. Okay. What you can do is, once you're happy with your questions, you can generate a marking scheme with AI. What this will do is it will fill in a marking scheme in here based on the exact questions we have in here, and whatever number of maximum marks you've set in the maximum marks field. And after a few seconds, we can see we have a really comprehensive marking scheme here. This is probably too much, to be honest, for something as simple as just a 5-question reading comprehension piece. But you can edit this further with AI later. And I'm going to cover editing all of these things in a separate tutorial. The purpose of this is just to show you how you can get started with generating. Okay. Like I said, I'm going to cover all of this editing, any of these later in another tutorial. One thing I did forget to mention is I can see the references that were used. So from the curriculum that we actually selected, so it shows for the task questions, we align them like so using this document. The success criteria, we align them using this document and this reasoning as well. Okay. Before I wrap up this tutorial, one last thing I just want to cover is a very small little thing, is that if I uploaded a source like this, for example, which is the same source, however, we actually have some additional questions on it. So this is the actual question from this source, right? What the assistant is going to do is it's going to use those questions first and then add additional questions on top. So in this one, we have got, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 questions here. So if I was to just go back to this screen and use that as an attachment instead, which has all of those questions on it, and I was to put the number of questions here up to 12, okay? What it's going to do is it's going to use those questions first from that document, and then add an extra 4 or 5 questions on top, because we've increased the number of questions that it will generate beyond what's already in the source document. So that's just one thing to watch out for. if there's questions in your source that you upload, or if it's part of an activity that students previously will have used, we will use those questions first and we'll add on top of them. Now, in a later tutorial where I'm showing you how you can refine all of this with AI, I will show you how you could completely change all of those questions with AI or get it to generate alternatives. But the default behavior is that if questions exist on the source, it will use those first. Okay. And as we can see from generation, it's used some of those questions. So question 1, name a part of the church from the text, which was taken directly from it. Question 2, what do you think the word stoically might mean when describing their mother? Give your reasons. And that's directly from it as well. So it's going to use those questions first, and then it will add additional ones on top. So if I look here, we've got up to 12 questions anyway, so it's definitely added a few more. But that's just one thing to watch out for when you're generating tasks using sources in Nurture. Okay. With that, I'm going to end the tutorial there. As I mentioned, I'm going to show you how you can edit these questions in a later tutorial. And in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how you generate questions directly from the existing worksheet or a past exam question, which work slightly differently to just uploading a source in there. And I'll cover them in the next 2 videos. So if you need help with anything, please feel free to reach out for us, and we'll speak to you very soon.